We're here. Okay. So welcome y'all back to Game of Thrones Adult Bible School Bible study here at Sunday School. We're still in Daniel. Today we're going to be in Daniel 6, and then we're going to jump to Daniel 9. You know, last week we were like Daniel 7 and 8, or Daniel 8 and 5. I'm sorry. So Daniel is not written in chronological order. The way Daniel is written is he kind of categorizes things. So he's got a little section on him. He's got a little section on his friends. He's got a little section on what's to come. And so that's kind of why things are kind of discombobulated when it comes to chronology. That's why we jump around in Daniel. This will be the last week we're in Daniel, at least for a little while, because there's going to be a lot happen. And we actually get some confusing things at the end of this, which I've got two little videos. They're each about between 4 and 5 minutes long. So I want to get through the scripture. And before we discuss verses of chapter 9, when we get to around verses 24 to 27, it's talking about some weird stuff. So we're not going to discuss that. We're going to listen to the videos because I got two different views on that. And then I've got my own personal view, which kind of fits in with the second view. So not exactly, but close. So we're going to go ahead and start today by going into Daniel chapter 6. Pull this up here. I need to do this, share, and there we go. Okay. Well, I was hoping our little picture would show up in the top, but anyway, so if someone wants to read verses 1 through 3, I think I fixed it so you can see all the words now. So, okay.
Good job.
It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they are, I just learned, assistants to Darius.
Mm-hmm.
And over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Okay.
So you've got Darius, the king. Remember, he's the Median king. Medo-Persia had kind of grouped together, and they consolidated their kingdoms because I guess they were so much alike. But the way they ruled people was they just kind of kept everything the way it was, but they made smaller groupings. They made smaller little communities. And what they had basically was 3 governors. They had the king, they had the 3 governors, and then they had a bunch of mayors over these little communities. So that's what satraps are. That would be like mayors of little communities. So a good example would be the Woodlands Township. You've got all the little village commissioners, but you've got one council over everything. Say, of course, I know it's more than 3 people, but you got 3 people.
Yeah,
Okay. So that's kind of how it's said. Now, Daniel, verse 3, Daniel is so distinguished that King Darius plans to set him over the whole kingdom. So King Darius is going to create a role, or wants to create a role where Daniel is over the 3 governors, but below the king, obviously. So
Like the prime minister and
almost like like a royal leader versus a administrative.
the assistant king.
Yeah, well, yeah.
a what king?
Not a co-regent, but yeah.
Assistant king, I like that.
So we'll go on to verses 4 and 5.
At this, the administrator and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could not find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negative. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of the God."
Now, I know Paul probably has something to say about this, but this sounds very familiar.
I wanted something to do Trump.
Okay.
But you really, when you look at that happened throughout history. It's
Right.
Not just
Correct.
today, but
Oh, yeah.
It happens a
You're
lot.
always-
it's the idea of putting
Somebody
power
out
over
there.
principle.
Right. Whenever you've got nobody questioned the king's rule.
Yeah, right.
But, well, the king gave him a better car than he gave me.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, he got that,
There's something wrong with him.
he got that $60,000 car that gets, 85 miles to the gallon on,
And I got a bicycle.
I got a $90,000 car, but it doesn't get as good a gas mileage. So why
And then
is
somebody
that?
got a freezer with ice
Right,
cream, right?
so, right. So,
Sounds like a meeting at the mailbox.
Yeah.
right, exactly, meeting at the back fence, exactly, yes, okay. 6 and 7.
So these administrators and sheriffs went on as a group to the king and said, may King Daniel Delirious live forever. The royal administrators, prefer sheriffs, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anybody who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, should be thrown into with the lions.
Ooh.
We're in Daniel.
That-
Sharp.
I see that you are, somebody's fixing to roar.
This ain't Mr. Rogers.
No.
Mr.
Wrong
Rogers.
neighborhood.
Mr. Rogers.
No cardigan and no sneakers.
Now, do y'all see the problem with this?
Yeah.
The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed
Yeah,
that the
right.
king should.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
They're telling the
Yeah.
king what to do.
Right, right. Is that the way it works?
Yeah.
Not usually.
Not the way it's supposed to work.
Well,
So they've got to come up with a plan. Well, how do we get the king to make it
To
think
agree
it
with
was
it.
his idea? Okay,
Isn't that
and
what
so
we're going through right now?
yes, so we get to verses 8 and 9.
Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing.
Okay, so that seemed pretty straightforward,
Yeah.
but
But
10 and 11.
You want to read? I'll get it. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went up as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help.
Okay, this says a lot for Daniel. Now, Daniel, remember, he was taken as a child, as a preteen, in order to be brainwashed, but in order to be indoctrinated into Babylonian society. That way, when they brought the people in, that he would be able to lead his own people under Babylonian rule. Daniel is somewhere between 60 years old and 80 years old at this point.
Oh,
Because
okay.
he was taken 7 to 10 years prior to the fall of Jerusalem. Okay, keep that in mind. And he was already in his preteens then.
Okay.
So they're 50 to 60 years. Well, no, they're not quite that long. Sorry, they're about 40 years into their exile. Okay, but do y'all remember when the temple was built? Where well, even in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, where people were commanded to face when they prayed.
Towards Jerusalem.
But Jerusalem hadn't been established.
Well, east.
Well, but afterward,
East.
to the east, and that's where most Arabic nations
Mhm.
now
Mhm.
follow that
That's
same
where,
pattern.
that's where
To the
primitive
east.
nations prayed to, and that's where our aboriginal nations in this country did.
Now, where is Daniel?
It's in
That's
Babylon.
north. So if he's facing Jerusalem,
He's facing south.
he is facing
Facing
south,
south.
not east. East would be to the rising sun. That would be to
Yeah.
a new day. Basically, you wake up, you pray to a new day. Okay. Now he's praying to the south, which tells us that over time he has had to adapt how his faith is lived out in his own life. Now, other Jews, I'm sure, probably tried to follow the same edicts as possible, But he's praying in front of an open window. So that means that he's not afraid to be seen, for one thing. And number two, that maybe he's leading by example, that it's not necessarily where we're supposed, what direction we're supposed to pray, but that we're supposed to be as close to God as we can. And the closest my face can be to God is to face south.
Right.
So he's leading kind of by example. But this gets him into trouble because of this edict. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying. Now, why would they go see Daniel?
Catch him.
To catch him. That's the only reason. They already don't
They
like
want to
him.
visit.
He's not one of them.
So
Work
he's
for
on-
But he
CNN.
got the big car with the big mileage.
So if he went upstairs to his room, there's gonna be other upstairs rooms, because almost everything was two-story houses. So if he-
Or higher.
Or higher. So people, if he's praying in an open window, people across the street can see
Mhm.
him and probably even hear him.
Correct.
And join in if they want.
And he's going to be as close probably to the window as he can get.
Okay, okay.
Okay. So number 12, I'll read this. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. They spoke to the king about the king's royal
They
decree.
decreed him to make.
Right.
Yes.
Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? They're calling him out. It's now a legal issue. Does the king have to follow the law?
King is the law.
The king is the law, or the king is above the law.
Yep.
But the king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So, yeah, I made the law, so I am the law. So yes, I made it in accordance with the Medes and Persians. So yes. that
And
is
if I
the
want to
decree.
do something different, I'll do something different.
Well, he didn't say that yet.
Nobody thinking it.
13 and 14.
Then they answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. Then as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him.
Okay. The king is in a dilemma that he's put himself in.
Mhm.
Because if he goes back on what he decreed, he is hypocritical. If he follows through, he gets rid of someone who he truly likes, but he knows his advice. He now knows his advisors don't. So he's looking for every legal way to avoid being a hypocrite. I know you want to speak up there. So 15 through 16.
And the men went as a group to the king and said to him, remember, O king, that according to the laws of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continuously, rescue you.
Okay. So they've already gotten what they want from Daniel. They've gotten proof. They've taken it to the king. Now they're never going to leave the king's side until the king makes a judgment on this. So the king, okay, I said it, therefore it has to go. And then what does he do? He goes to Daniel and says, may the God whom you serve continually, that means all the time, rescue you.
Rescue you. Yeah.
So there is hope for Daniel already.
Mhm.
So, there's somewhere between 16 and 17 in that verse, when we hear the story, when we read the story now, we realize, well, we never got that he got thrown into there, just that the order was given that he was.
So there's hope for Daniel.
And- right.
And it's not from the king.
It's
It's
from
not
God.
from the king.
But somewhere between the end of verse 16 and the beginning of verse 17, he's thrown in there. Okay.
Okay.
So 17 through 19.
A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. And then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of the day, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den.
Okay. In the last two verses plus this first verse here, does any of this sound a little familiar? Does it sound like a gospel story?
A stone put over the mouth of the den, kind of like a tomb.
Kind of like a tomb, but also the king
Sealed it.
sealing it based on what the crowd wants.
Does the signet ring have anything to do with it particularly?
Well, because it was a king's edict, the signet ring would make it official.
Oh, okay.
Nobody could.
It sounds like
Only
Pilate-
Nobody
only
could
the
mess with
king
it.
Pilate's caught in a dilemma here too.
in the gospel story, yes. Yeah, Pilate said, I find no fault in this.
I wash my hands of it, yeah.
And Pilate, okay, you get what you want, but I'm done with it. In this case, the king, yeah, well, that's the decree.
I got him.
Mhm.
Pilate was a brave man when you think about it, because he went against his wife's wishes.
Yes. Yeah.
Actually, it was not too bright.
That's why he was, that's why he was in Jerusalem.
Are you getting along at home today?
But we get a little bit of insight into the king's mentality.
Yeah.
He
was
can't-
worried.
Right, he is worried.
Yeah,
He's probably sick to his stomach that he has condemned pretty much an innocent man
can't
to
sleep.
what he believes is going to be death. Now, I will laugh. I was going to put some pictures up here, some of the artwork that's been done over
Yeah.
the centuries and the millennia of Daniel in the lion's den. And every one I looked at had like all the maned lions and one female there, and that's not
Oh, the
how
female
lion
is the
prides
one that
work. There's one male and everybody else
Everybody else
is
is
female,
female. Uh-huh.
and the female is the one in charge, the lead female.
So I'm gonna add, I think the king is afraid of Daniel's God.
We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out.
Or he's hopeful of Daniel's God.
Well,
I look at it
Hopeful
as
that
different.
Daniel's God is gonna come through for Daniel, because he sure realizes he's made a mess of things. by
Okay,
that
okay,
decree.
Well, that's
That's
it. He
another
realized,
standard.
to me, the
That's
king
another
made a
standard.
mess of things. He realized, oops, I'm caught.
Yeah.
So he
I
had
sure
to carry it
hope, I
through.
sure
And
hope
it bugged him
Daniel's
all night
God
long.
takes
Mhm.
care of him.
And every one of us, in one way or another, has made a decision or done something that night we didn't sleep very well.
So I don't
So
think,
it's
I don't
a
think
very
he's that
human
far
thing
yet.
that he did.
I don't think he's that far yet. Go ahead, Mike.
well, I wanna direct your minds back to the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, that Nebuchadnezzar became a believer after he was out in, he had left for 7 years, became wild, wild as the animals, wild animals, and let his fingernails grow to 18 feet. And, and this is all with Daniel there.
Yeah.
So Daniel has
He's
some
an influence on him.
motivation to people, the way he worships, the way he presents God. I would say Daniel is more than just a prophet, but he's an evangelist,
That's right.
an Old Testament version of an evangelist. So, but right, first light of dawn. As soon as light has come up over the horizon, the king hurries to the lion's
And
den.
I'll bet the king doesn't usually wake up at first light of dawn.
Well, he's usually been in a feast probably
Yeah.
the night before.
Well, he's not waking up, he's already.
He's still awake.
He's already
yeah,
awake.
yeah.
He didn't
Right.
sleep.
So that he's been waiting.
Yeah,
for
waiting
that
for the
first
light, yeah.
20 through 21.
When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, may the king live forever.
Okay,
My
stop right
God."
there real quick.
Okay.
May the king live forever. Daniel begins his response by acknowledging that the king was not a hypocrite, that the king, even in his,
Situation.
he had the opportunity to stop it, but he didn't. So the king was a man of his word, even in the worst of circumstances.
Okay.
But this is the same greeting that the administrators gave to the king too. May the king live forever, and all in different words. So it's regarded as kind of a common greeting. This not only by him saying that to start with, not only says, yeah, I'm still here, but there's absolutely nothing wrong.
Yeah, and maybe I forgive you for throwing me in here.
Possibly. I mean, it gets kind of into that.
Are we missing something though? Look at verse 20. It said here. Daniel, see what living God, has the living God saved you?
servant of the living God.
God saved it, and
The
the king is
king
saying this, the
Yeah,
king is saying, the
yeah.
living God,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's not,
And he said,
the
"Has
living
your
God,
God."
it's like he's, really praising God almost here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
In 21, I think he's being a diplomat.
Correct.
Oh, yeah.
He's back,
Live
he's back,
forever, man.
he's back to
Okay.
preaching.
He's-
So,
yeah.
so go ahead,
Yep,
continue.
I'm good with that.
My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty.
Okay. So not only is he innocent in the king's eyes, but I am innocent in God's eyes too. And since you asked about God, he leads with that.
Okay,
I'm innocent before God's eyes, and I'm also innocent in front of you. So I want to make a little point when we regard this story as, from our childhood, when we hear this, we often get this one and the fiery furnace mixed up.
Yeah,
In that we've got God, we've got Jesus in the midst of all this and everybody's seeing that. Well, no, we don't get that in this story. Daniel says the angel of the Lord was there with him, but we never see that. Like when they're all, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in the fiery furnace
okay,
and they actually see the angel of God, of the Lord
okay.
in their midst. Okay, so 23-24.
The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. Woo, wow. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their
Wow.
bones.
Wow.
They are gone.
payback.
They are gone.
Now, there have been scholars who, although they're in the minority, who have said, well, they may have been, they're trying to resolve this issue of why Daniel was left alone, but everybody else was in there. Well, that maybe they were fed, they weren't hungry when Daniel was in there, but here it is 24
now we're
hours
hungry.
later.
Oh, I
I
didn't
don't
realize
buy
it was 24 hours later.
And
So the lions are saying, we've waited as long as we
Right.
can, we're hungry.
there's some other, again, in the minority. Daniel was bigger than the lion.
Oh.
David was able to conquer lions with his bare hands. Maybe
Yeah.
Daniel could too.
Right.
Maybe Daniel was a lion whisperer.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether that is true or not, that's not what Scripture says.
Well, his God was with him.
Because he had trusted in God.
Yes. So
The
God
angel of
saved
the
him.
Lord was there, and we do have images of an angel of the Lord being, we get with Balaam's donkey and all that kind of thing, of animals being able to see it, but not humans. But
Okay.
Daniel apparently knew.
You gotta keep in mind something here, that
The kids kept pulling on the lion's tail.
Yeah.
The scripture where you said, people try to say that the lions are well fed. Lions react to stimulus, so if
Yes,
food
they
is
do.
placed in front of them, guess what they're gonna
They're
do?
gonna go
Well,
after it.
that
They're gonna give it a
stimulus
go.
also is Daniel sitting there praying, he's being quiet and
Yes.
all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's other people, oh.
Well, you have
That's
to a
right.
lion, and they'll say,
Yeah.
food,
Yeah.
So, right. Now, the men who had falsely accused Daniel, is that true?
Well, no,
What was he being
he
accused
did
of?
what the
He
decree
was
said they
doing what they
couldn't
said they
do,
He
couldn't
wasn't
do.
he
So
did.
that's
doing
right.
anything.
He wasn't
But
falsely.
but
was
they
not
made the
falsely
decree
accused.
just to catch.
Right,
Daniel.
it was right. It was the law was manipulated to serve their purposes.
Ooh, that
Um,
sounds
That
familiar
sounds very
too.
familiar, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Okay,
Mhm.
And the king recognized it.
okay, so 25 and 26.
Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in all the land.
All
May
the
your
land.
peace abound. In 26, you said?
Yep.
Okay. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the Lord, or before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever.
Okay, So the first decree that was sent out was to the Babylonian or the Medo-Persian
Mhm.
Now it's to every nation, peoples of every language,
All the earth.
as far, whatever countries they could think of, whatever nations existed, kingdoms existed, I'm issuing this decree. May you prosper greatly.
Okay.
You know, I hope y'all
Blessings on
are all doing well, but in my kingdom, that every part of my kingdom, people are going to fear the living God. So
Daniel's God.
he's a convert.
Yet.
The king is a verbal believer here. Look at what 27 says.
27 and 28.
He rescued and he saves. He performed signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel was blessed during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus, the Persians.
Okay, Darius and Cyrus. This particular Darius that we're talking about was not Darius II, who was, you know, he was a big name. This Darius is one of the smaller potentates that happened to be in charge of the kingdom during that time frame. Cyrus, however, was a very powerful person. And Cyrus is, I think it's Isaiah that actually declares Cyrus, there is one coming before you who is a servant of God, and actually gives the name Cyrus. Now, keep in mind that part of Isaiah was written while they were in exile. So it could have been that this is someone taking that from whoever had written that part of Isaiah concerning Cyrus. But Cyrus is going to be very benevolent too. And, you know, so the kingdom of Israel has, despite all their difficulties, they're being blessed by God, even while in exile. So now we go on to Daniel 9. I want to, everything else that we've read so far has been in a narrative form, third person. Now, all of a sudden, we get to a first person. This is believed to be, this particular chapter is believed to be written in the 2nd century BC. So about 250 years after the events of Daniel. And it is it's believed to be by most scholars a self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning the prophecies that Daniel gave have been fulfilled and it's being written about now. Okay. With that said, when we get to the end of this, it's probably going to bring up a lot of questions. And I do ask that you hold your questions, especially when we get like I said, around verses 24 through 27 and stuff, that we hold our questions. We'll watch those videos and then we'll go over any questions we have. Okay. So chapter 9, verses 1 through 3.
In the first year of Darius, son of Axarus, a Mede of descent, who was made ruler over the Babylon kingdom, in the first year of his reign, I Daniel understood from the scriptures according to the word of the Lord given to Jeremiah the prophet, that the dissolution of Jerusalem will last 70 years. So I turned to the Lord God and pleaded with him in prayer and petition, in fasting and in sackcloth and ashes.
Okay. So this is a prophecy to start with. The desolation of Jerusalem would last how long?
70.
How long were they in exile? From the time that Jerusalem was ransacked to the time they were
70 years.
70
No,
years.
no, 49 years.
Oh,
49 years. So that's already wrong.
yeah.
Okay. Verse 4 and 5.
I prayed to the Lord my God and confessed, Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. We have sinned and done wrong. We have been wicked and have rebelled. We have turned away from your commands and laws.
Okay. Does this sound like the Daniel we've just been reading about?
Not really.
Not really. This is believed to have been written another 250 years past all this. They're trying to resolve how Daniel got to where he was under Darius, that he began his ministry as a prophet praying for deliverance for Israel, confessing sins, not only for himself, but for people, an intercessory prayer, a compulsory prayer, that kind of thing.
But
So
this indicates that Daniel was saying these things.
this says that Daniel
Yes,
said them,
yes,
but
he didn't.
right, we
Okay.
have no, in fact, the reason we think it was written later, number one, everything we read up to that point was written in Hebrew.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, this is written in Aramaic.
Oh.
Okay.
That's a clue.
Yeah.
Big clue.
Okay, 6 and 7.
We have not listened to your servants, prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princesses, and our fathers, and to all the people of the land. Lord, you are righteous, but this day we are covered with shame, the men of Judah and the people of Jerusalem and all Israel, both near and far, in all the countries where you have scattered us, because of our unfaithfulness to you.
Daniel would probably not have a lot of insight. If this was early on in Daniel's experience in Babylon, he probably would not have realized that the northern kingdom had been sent to other areas. Because he only knows the Babylonian way, and the Babylonian way was to take them to one place
Yeah.
and hold them there. So for him to say in the countries where you've scattered us because of our unfaithfulness to you, that's probably not Daniel saying that. It's
Yeah.
probably someone else writing under the pseudonym,
Mhm.
or writing as Daniel, because that has power. There's a couple of
Yeah.
Paul's letters that are written that way too, in the name of Paul, or I think even first in 2 Peter is written in the name of Peter, but they don't believe Peter actually wrote it. They believe a contemporary Peter or something, because it has more power. The name has power. So, okay, 8 through 10.
Open shame belongs to us, O Lord, to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, because we have sinned against thee. To the Lord our God belong compassion and forgiveness, for we have rebelled against him. Nor have we obeyed the voice of the Lord our God to walk in his teachings, which he set before us through his servants and prophets.
We've not obeyed the Lord our God or kept the laws he gave us. Well, Daniel did.
Mhm.
Okay, 11 and 12.
All Israel has transgressed your laws and turned away, refusing to obey you. Therefore, the curse of sworn judgment was written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out on us because we have sinned against you. You have fulfilled the word spoken against us and against our rulers by bringing us great disaster. Under the whole heaven, nothing has ever been done like what has been done to Jerusalem.
Yeah, this Daniel never, in all the rest of Daniel, he never speaks like this. Okay, it just provides further evidence that it probably.
Whole thing's a
Well, it's
different
not
tone.
him.
The whole
Correct.
thing-
Yeah.
The whole thing's a
Completely,
different tone.
completely. But like I said, I'm including this because, part of the Game of Thrones is this eternal throne. And that's why I included this chapter.
Mhm.
13 and 15.
Just as it is written in the laws of Moses, all this disaster has come on us, yet we have not sought the favor of the Lord our God by turning from our sins and giving attention to his truth. The Lord did not hesitate to bring the disasters on us, but the Lord our God is righteous in everything he does, yet we have not obeyed him.
He's just being very persistent. Okay. 15 and 16.
Now, Lord our God, who brought your people out of Egypt with a mighty hand and who made for yourself a name that endures to this day, we have sinned, we have done wrong. Lord, in keeping with all your righteous acts, turn away your anger and your wrath from Jerusalem, your city, your holy hill. Our sins and the iniquities of our ancestors have made Jerusalem and your people an object of scorn to all those around us.
This is starting to sound almost verbatim like some of the other prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, in the way it's being said. Okay, 17 through 19.
Now, our God, hear the prayers and petitions of your servants. For your sake, O Lord, look with favor on your desolate sanctuary Give ear, O God, and hear, open your eyes and see the desolation of the city that bears your name. We do not make request of you because we are righteous, but because of your great mercy. O Lord, listen. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hear and act. For your sake, O my God, do not delay, because your city and your people bear your name.
20 through 22.
Now while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people, Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God, while I was still speaking in prayer, and then the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in my vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. And he gave me instruction and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you insight with understanding.
Okay, remember when Daniel was asked to interpret the dream of the king and he had trouble figuring it out what it was? The angel Gabriel came to him and explained to him what all it was going to be. This is, again, another visit by Gabriel, at least in this form. And I'm going with the scholars on this one. We're 250 years later. We've got insight and understanding now. If you take what we know about the Bible as the canon, as it's in the canon now, and you project it from when it was canonized, formed into what we know, 2,000 years later, here we are reading it. We've got a whole lot more understanding. Well, this is the same thing that's going on. Is they know the history. They've got some of the Torah. They've got some of this already written down. And we're somewhere around 250 BC, 200 BC. So we're almost to the point of Jesus being made, God being made incarnate through Jesus. So, so we understand this. They're understanding just a little part of it, or at least this writer is saying that he is. So, and again, using Gabriel, it's the writer trying to add credence to the name Daniel. Okay. 23 and 24.
As soon as you begin to pray, an answer was given, which I have come to tell you, for you are the highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the message and understand the vision. 70 sevens are decreed for all your people in your holy city to finish transition, to put an end to sin, to atone from wickedness, and to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prosperous, and to anoint the most holy.
That's almost Revelation.
Well, yes, that's why I said when we get to 24, we're going to kind of hold questions because just the first two words, 77
77,
starts
yeah.
to throw
What
people.
was your- what was your question? So we don't go into.
25, I'll get this. Know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. 29 through 31.
Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed. the
Oh,
third-
hang on. I've skipped something.
Well,
Yeah,
like I said,
because we don't have that
Yeah.
in chapter
Something
9.
must have not, what comes after that?
26.
Yeah,
And it goes through 30.
through 27.
Okay, go ahead and read. Somebody read 26 and 27.
We've skipped some now. Skip
Well,
20.
You read 25.
Okay, 25. All right, 26 and 7.
Did we read 25?
Ronnie,
I'll do it.
Yeah.
After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and the desolations have been decreed. That's through 26.
Okay, go ahead and read the last one.
Go ahead.
He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7 in the middle of The 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him.
Is this the end times it's talking about?
Starting to sound like.
Hey, sound like you asked a question.
Out of the room, Fran.
Okay. Okay, so this first video is a mainline church take on this chapter. Okay, specifically those last few verses that we read, because it gets confusing. 77s, it's broke down into what is it? Yeah, it's broke down into 7 sevens and then 62 sevens. Well, that only makes 69 sevens.
Yeah.
And then at the 70th seven, halfway through that, you know, so okay, so you're going to hear this term called weeks of years. So basically these 77s, the sevens mean not 7 days, but 7 years.
Oh.
It's like a week of years.
Huh.
So each 7 is 7 years. So it's 70 of them. What does that tell you?
A lot of years.
490 years.
490 years, yeah.
Now, there's been a lot of people who have taken this and tried to apply it somewhere. And they've been pretty close. They've been pretty close. One is from the time Jerusalem was ransacked by Babylon till the time till the time Jesus arrives. That's roughly around 490 years, roughly.
You wouldn't go for 500?
Well, it's roughly, and I said we're off by a decade. One way or the other. But where does the other, or not 490? Sorry, 483 years.
All right.
483. So there's still 7 years out there. Dispensationalism would dictate that 7 years is the tribulation. And so when we hear about halfway through that 70th seven, that 70th group of 7 years, that's the tribulation halfway, and then the great tribulation would be the other 3 years. So this is a mainline church take on that. This would be the disciples, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, like I said, most of those who are not just evangelical bent.
But a lot of times in the scriptures, in the Old Testament, 7 was used as the perfect number. You know,
A
7 days
sign-
of creation.
a sign
So
of
it was
God's
not-
completion.
Not always a literal,
Mhm.
it was just,
Yeah.
3 was the perfect number.
Right, for the Trinity.
7
7
was a sign of completion.
right.
So,
But
and of
it's
course,
7 was
40,
making-
the number 40 typically
yeah,
means just a big number, it's just a long time. So, okay, so I'm going to play this. It is, dang it. Gotta go back.
A mainline church.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to pull it up online here. Yeah, you're more centrist to progressive thought pattern. And I use those political terms. Oh, we'll have a commercial probably. Yep.
Yeah, you gotta get that.
We have to buy a phone.
That face that is usually
Maybe.
covered by our phone has finally made an appearance. That face wouldn't be doing that if you.
Hey, there we are.
The book of Daniel has always been a hot button topic, and chapter 9 is often found to be the focus of that contention. Its ambiguous language and intertextual references have made it a prime candidate for misinterpretation and misapplication throughout the centuries. I have been asked to briefly comment on perhaps the most frequently debated section of the chapter,
I didn't ask.
verses 24 to 27. Questions about this section are not hard to find. When was Daniel written? Do these verses in chapter 9 predict the coming and death of Jesus? Does the angel Gabriel accurately predict the very year of his death? There are several ways that scholars have addressed these questions. Concerning the date of the book, for example, I will simply quote Collins. The 2nd century date for the visions of Daniel, chapters 7 through 12, is accepted and beyond reasonable doubt by critical scholarship.
So they put a 2nd century.
Concerning the vision in chapter 9, much ink has been spilled,
BC.
and it is not my intention to present that data here. For an extensive, up-to-date bibliography on issues in the book of Daniel, see Carol Newsom's 2014 commentary on Daniel in the Old Testament Library series.
I don't have that book, but I can get it.
What I would like to address here is neither the correct starting point for these 70 weeks of years, nor the problems with the various ways in which these years have been calculated. Instead, I would like us to take a step back and look at the purpose of Daniel chapter 9. According to the text, Daniel, having spent decades in exile, determines that the prophecy given by Jeremiah in chapters 25 and 29 is being fulfilled. They have been sentenced to exile for 70 years.
Oh, I thought he was wearing a
At
robe or
this,
something.
Daniel begins to pray, confessing the sins of the nation, begging forgiveness and restoration. During his prayer, while he was still speaking, the angel Gabriel appears and explains that Jeremiah's prophecy concerning 70 years was actually 70 weeks of years, a total of 490. Concerning this, Carol Newsom writes,
Years.
as Daniel has been praying on behalf of his people in the holy city, so the angel addresses his concerns for them. Yet the first words out of Gabriel's mouth undercut Daniel's understanding of the Jeremianic prophecy. Gabriel informs him that the prophecy refers not to 70 years, but to 70 sevens, that is, 70 weeks of years. Gabriel is not contradicting Jeremiah, but disclosing a hidden meaning that rests on one or more accepted exegetical practices of the 2nd century BCE.
That was clear.
But why
as
the
mud.
correction or development of Daniel's
Like
understanding?
any main line.
Let's think about the time and setting in which this portion of Daniel was written
I told you, he's kind
and
of
what
a
effect it might have had on its contemporary audience.
scholarly.
Here, I would like to quote Collins again at length. Daniel 9 stands out from the rest of the revelations of chapters 8 through 12, insofar as it is explicitly formulated as an interpretation of older biblical texts. The passages in question are found in Jeremiah 25, 11 to 12, and in 29, 10, and say that the dominion of Babylon will last for 70 years, after which time the Jews will be restored. Historically, this prophecy was not accurate. Less than 70 years elapsed before the Jewish restoration. More seriously, the desolations of Jerusalem were not then brought to an end, as was painfully obvious in the Maccabean era. Accordingly, the biblical text is treated as a mystery, just as the symbolic visions were. The interpretation must be provided by an angel in apocalyptic fashion. Collins concludes, the focus of the prophecy is on the last week, the real time of the author. This is marked by the murder of an anointed one, Onias III, and the profanation of the temple. The point of the prophecy is that all this is determined in advance, and an end is decreed. What follows this end is primarily concerned with the restoration of the cult. Transgression will be ended, everlasting righteousness established, and the holy place anointed. His main concern is not in speculating on the future, but in providing an assurance that the predetermined period of Gentile sovereignty is coming to an end. In short, the apocalyptic text of Daniel 9, composed in the 2nd century during a time of persecution, was not intended to predict the distant future, but was a prophecy written after the fact, reinterpreting an earlier prophetic text through accepted interpretive means in order to explain that God was still in control, that all the events had been foreordained, and that the time of the end, their deliverance, was drawing near.
So if that was supposed to clear it up, there's no hope.
Well, it's clear as mud.
There's no
That's what I
hope,
said,
there's no
yeah.
hope.
Okay. That was just, that's why I have 2 videos.
The other one's gonna clear up the first one.
Probably not, but it'll give it.
Evangelical
This
church.
second video is really audio. It's a radio program that was put on a while back. But you've got the host, and then you've got a caller who's a minister. I don't think he says whether he's a Baptist or not, but an evangelical question about it. And I tend to kind of go more this side of things, although I don't think there's anything that the other fellow said that I disagree with. God is still in control, that the prophecy points to a time that it's not yet, and that God is going to sum all that up. I don't disagree with any of that. How that happens is another story. And that,
I don't think he said anything we hadn't already said, so
Yeah,
right.
I agree, yeah.
But I'm not real sure it was speaking English.
well, it was. I tell you, that was every exegesis seminary class I had. So
That's probably true.
Yeah.
just like that.
Try to take notes in there,
Yeah.
boys and girls.
Well, they've got it down to a science. They know exactly how to get you to do your own exegesis, and that's to talk like that.
Uh-huh.
Don't take our word for it. Do it yourself.
Do it yourself.
So you don't have to listen to us.
Don't disagree.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Randy. Let's go back to our phone callers. Next up is Mark in Anderson, Missouri. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Mark's not there. Mark's getting a hot dog.
Where no stay.
Hey,
Well, thank you.
hey, I've got a question
This
on
is evangelical.
Daniel 9, I guess you'd say from 24 to 27. And I guess I really didn't know after reading, I've studied Bible my whole life, that Jeremiah had talked about 70 years, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah. So as prophesied by Jeremiah, Jerusalem was going to experience a partial restoration when 70 years were completed for Babylon. Now you find that in, I think it's Jeremiah 29. However, as revealed to Daniel through Gabriel, the angel, the return from exile was a type of the antitypical freedom that would be experienced through Judas Maccabeus, which, by the way, itself was typological of ultimate restoration through the Messianic Jesus. And therefore, we can see Daniel's 77s in that passage that you're talking about, Daniel 9, verses 24 through 27. They encompass 10 Jubilee eras. And as such, they represent the extended exile of the Jews that would end in the fullness of time.
A Jubilee era.
50 years.
50 years. Right.
500 years.
Correct.
480, 494.
So, right, he's talking about 10 Jubilee eras. So at the end of 50 years, all slaves were set free, all debts were canceled out. What reason he's bringing that up is that there's still 7 years to go on that last Jubilee, that ultimate Jubilee period. That 70th seven, which is what the tribulation will be. At the end of that 7 years, that the ultimate Jubilee period will be established, is what he's doing. Why he's going that route, I don't know. But
that got my attention when he said that.
Yeah.
You might call it the quintessential Jubilee, when the people of God would experience ultimate redemption and restoration, not in a holy city, but in a holy Christ. A holy Christ who inaugurates a kingdom that will itself endure forever. So that's what's going on with Daniel's 77s in that passage.
Well, okay, now how come though that towards the end of it, and I don't know if this has thrown off a lot of people, but I've preached it myself for years, that 1 week where it says he confirms the covenant with many for 1 week. How come that Daniel does extend that like that? And if it's not something that is futuristic, who was he that confirmed that covenant with many for 1 week?
Yeah, I think what's really important is to recognize that this is very, very difficult to begin with. And so if you've preached on it you've probably looked at commentaries and seen that there is very little agreement on what that means. I myself have done a great deal of research on this, and I've written about this in my book, Has God Spoken? But I think the murder of Onias marked the beginning of the 2,300 evenings and mornings as the death of Antiochus, who was the Old Testament Antichrist, marked their end.
Death of Onias.
And what you have is 3 years later, in 167, you have the ultimate sacrilege befalling Jerusalem. The armed forces of Antiochus rise up against the temple fortress. They abolish the daily sacrifice. They set up the abomination that causes desolation. And with impunity, Antiochus plunders the temple treasury. He dedicates the sanctuary to the Olympian Zeus. He sacrifices a pig on the altar. And Hellenized Jews, they start taking on the mark of the Greco-Syrian beast, and they sacrifice to idols, they profane the Sabbath and so forth. They become Hellenized, in other words. But some, of course, resisted the Hellenizing ways of Antiochus. And exactly 3 years after he desecrates the temple fortress, after he abolishes daily sacrifice and so forth, the temple is rededicated and the daily sacrifice is restored. Obviously, that happens under Judas Maccabeus. And you can read a lot about that in Maccabees. In fact, Maccabees gives you the color commentary, as it were, that you miss in Daniel. So Daniel is prophesying in the 6th century before Christ, and he's prophesying about what's going to happen during the time of Judas Maccabeus. And Judas Maccabeus is a type that points to an antitype, which is Jesus Christ. So in that sense, you have Daniel extending all the way from Babylon to the babe of Bethlehem. But the kingdoms themselves that are offered or proffered in the book of Daniel end with the Greco-Syrian beast. I mean, that's what's in view in Daniel's prophecy. But I lay all of this out sequentially in a lot of detail in my book, Has God Spoken? And I lay this out in 2 different sections. One in a section that is titled Succession of Nations, and another that is titled The Abomination of Desolation. And I talk about the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel as well as by Jesus.
But didn't that everything was completely ended by AD 70? Is that correct?
Well, no, I don't think Daniel stretches into the Roman Empire. But in terms of asking the question about the abomination of desolation that Jesus spoke about, of course, he references back to Daniel's abomination of desolation, and then uses that as a way of pointing forward to a future abomination. It was 40 years after Jesus spoke, or a generation after Jesus spoke. He's talking about there not just the desolation of the temple, but the utter demolition of the temple under Titus and his forces.
The fact that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and that was under Rome. Here we're talking about all that happened under the Hellenes.
Correct.
Wow, that changes things a lot.
Well, Daniel was part of Babylon.
Yeah.
Yeah, what both speakers are saying is that Daniel, they can both agree that Daniel definitely takes that particular prophecy there, or whoever that writer is, takes that prophecy as far as the Maccabean revolt. What they disagree on is how far after it goes. The first fella doesn't believe that it extends all the way to the birth of Jesus, whereas the second guy believes it extends that far. But that the second fella, he says that it stops at Jesus' birth as well. However, when Jesus starts talking about it, that Jesus extends that to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD by Titus. I personally have a further, I believe this talks about an eternal throne as well. Now, do I believe that there's going to be an actual tribulation? At this point, I don't know. 10 years ago, I would have told you absolutely. At this point, I don't know, but it's not my purpose to know exactly how that happens. My purpose is to know that I'm a beloved child of God, and I don't need to worry about that. But there are people that do. So I personally believe that the next slide, I'll try to pull it up here. It's the first time that's given me that message before. Blow this up here. Now, we've seen a couple of these diagrams. I've shown a couple of them in previous classes, but this basically breaks down what I believe those years are and how we can extend it further on to the end of time, where he's got 444 BC. That's when the decree goes out that they're being let out of exile. They're being let go back to rebuild their temple and to establish their home again. So that takes place in 444 BC. Right now, in the Daniel period that we're in, we're around 480, 490, somewhere in there. Okay, that number ring a bell? Okay, yeah. So that's where some of this does. So the 7 weeks of years, just means a grouping of 7 years. When we think of 7 days in a week is what we understand. So when we hear week, we're just going to extend, instead of a day, that single period equals a year. So a week of years. So 7 weeks of years, 49 years from that point. That's till they establish the, I got that right. Yeah. But remember, 49 years that was how long they were in exile. So this 49 years is how long it takes them to reestablish and get everything back to going. So the numbers, even though they sound the same, they refer to 2 different things. So don't confuse this meaning that they were that's their exile period. It wasn't. That's how long it took them to build the temple and establish Jerusalem again. Then there's going to be 62 weeks or 483 years. The first guy is saying that time takes place and ends with the destruction of the temple and the coming of Christ, and then Jesus' death. It ends with the destruction of the temple, the desolation of the temple. The second guy extends that to the coming of Jesus. And so this 483 years from this point now goes to Jesus' death in AD 33, roundabout. Jesus, however, the second guy was saying that he could see when Jesus mentions it, that it extends another 40 years or another frame, another set of, and so the destruction of the temple, he extends it all the way back to 70 AD when Jesus mentioned it. However, we've only got 69 weeks. So where did the 70 weeks come in? There's still a week out there that has not been completed yet. There's still a week of years that hasn't been completed. And so in my mind, that is going to be whatever this says what's left of the 7 weeks. And it's got it broken down into that half and half. Whether that's a literal week of years, or whether that is a figurative week of years, I still believe that this goes further out to the timing of God's plan when we will reach ultimate restoration, where God's people and God will remain together. And so that's where I take that. So I take it out a little further, and there's a lot of people that are with me, but there's quite a few, as you saw, that aren't. So that's where we take that. So are there any questions up to that?
I wouldn't know what to ask.
Okay.
That does include the end time.
Now, better be yes or no.
I tend to think that it goes all the way through to AD 70, And it includes the birth and death of Christ
Mhm.
because of the way the prophecy was written.
And you would fit into that more conservative.
Yeah, that's where I, you know, the other was interesting, but it's hogwash. No, it's not. but-
What I think all three of us can, and I'm not by any means including myself in the ranks of scholarly, okay? But what the first guy said, what the second guy said, and what I can agree with them and project is it's not so much how it happens, but the purpose is why.
Why?
And that is because we are beloved children of God. We
Uh-huh.
shouldn't focus on the what and
Right.
how. We should focus on the why.
I'll go with that.
Yeah.
I'll go with that.
Okay, so next time,
All
next
right,
week,
next time.
Ezra 1 and 2. Now, why do you think we'd be doing that?
No idea.
Ezra and Nehemiah were written about the same time. So we're going to be going, they kind of run in succession with one another. If you were to take this, if you were to put all of what we've done from the time we finished up with the Kings and Chronicles, and then we're able to compress this all down into what we've done since then, into one little story, this is where it picks up.
Okay.
So this is, I mean, right off the bat, Ezra 1 says that the decree went out for the exile to end. So the exile ends. Okay,
All right.
and they get to go home.
All right.
Yay.
And speaking of going home,
Let's go.
Michael, real quick though, when they get to go home back to Jerusalem, it was pretty well decimated, wasn't it?
yes,
Because
the
the Babylonians had
land,
torn
the
everything
land
down.
has been destroyed not only by the Babylonians, but by the Egyptians, by some of the other nations that have come in
Okay.
and fought with one another. Yes, it is completely desolate.
Okay, so then in order to rebuild it, they have to rebuild it before, in order to tear it down again in 87.
Well, the neat thing is, remember the original building of the temple? Anybody remember how long that took to build the temple under Solomon? 7 years.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
at least like that. And then it took him 13 years to build his castle, his palace. Yeah, forgot your question.
Well, the idea being there that they got back into a desolate.
Oh,
re-
just
It
like
takes-
Solomon got help from all the other nations,
Yeah,
Cyrus is going to use his kingdom to help them rebuild.
Okay, so Cyrus comes in, it still gonna take 7
And
years.
it's wonderful because as they're digging through some of the rubble, I get chills thinking about it. They find the book. They find the book of the law as they're digging through the rubble,
Never lost.
which says even though all the utensils, all the gold and silver and all that were taken, they were
Gone,
ransacked.
Nobody wanted the
book, but that's the most prized
Yeah,
possession of the
yeah.
Israelites. So, anyway. Okay, goodbye, everybody. See you next week.